Welcome back to the Salon Success Secrets Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that could change the entire way you lead your team.
So good. We're diving deep into the difference between force and power. And I promise this isn't just a mindset thing. This is a leadership strategy that can help you finally feel less drained, less frustrated, and more aligned with the business that you're building.
So let's kick it off with this. Force is when you use your energy to make something move or change, especially when something is pushing back or in the way. Power, on the other hand, is the ability to hold and maintain a position. It doesn't require pushing, it just is. Now, think about that in your salon.
Yeah, so good. Because it's almost like, have you ever had a team member, that's walked in and they've been totally out of dress code before? And, it's like almost like you feel that it's like your heart starts to rise up into your chest. And it's like you want to force that correction, like go home and change. That's not how you show up here. And technically, if you did that, I guess you'd be right. But what happens next is maybe they comply, but under the surface, what did you really create? You probably created fear, embarrassment, disconnection, and that's force, because now let's look at that same moment from a place of power. So instead of reacting, you pull them aside and quietly ask, hey, how do you think that outfit lines up with the brand that we're building here? And you just pause and you let them answer. That is power. You're still addressing the same issue, but instead of creating compliance through fear, you're just helping to create awareness. You're inviting alignment. You're truly holding a position and letting them rise into it, because power creates change and force creates control.
So good. And so maybe you're thinking, oh, this sounds great, Jen and Lindsay, but I've got deadlines, I've got goals, I've got standards. I don't have time to coddle or babysit people. And hey, we totally get it. But you got to ask yourself, has forcing ever really worked long term? Have you ever forced someone to upsell retail and they did it that day, but never again? That's such, really think about that. Or have you ever forced someone to take more clients and they hit their numbers, but burn out and leave the salon like 3 months later? We all have as salon owners because force is short term. Let me say that again because it's so powerful. Force is short term, it's reactive, and it makes us feel like we're leading, but really we're just managing chaos with like that tight grip.
Mm. Yeah, that managing chaos with that tight grip. That's a really great way to put that, Jen, and to look at it. It reminds me of a time, where we heard about someone who led with force and truly paid for it, because, they worked with a stylist that was so talented, but they weren't following their rebooking system, and they're like, but I've told them again and again, and said, you've got to ask. You're losing income. We're losing clients, and so they were like, finally they forced it. I told her if she didn't improve her rebooking numbers by the end of the month, she would lose access to our guests, and so in that moment, it was like, okay, they saw that slight improvement for 2 weeks, but then that person completely shut down. They stopped showing up with energy and eventually they quit because, when you really look at that situation, you're not leading somebody. You're truly scaring somebody, and if you had approached that situation with power instead, and sat with her and said, tell me why you're not rebooking. What's really going on here? You might have discovered that they didn't feel confident. They needed the right words to say, not warnings. It's like coaching, not consequences. I think that that's a powerful example of the difference between power and force when it comes to having that coaching conversation with rebooking.
So good. I remember that exact conversation, and it was so powerful to
Mm.
hear that salon owner forcing that stylist in that position, and then or doing it for a little while, and then just throwing her hands up because it was forced upon her. And as human beings, there's one thing is we don't like to be told what to do. I've learned that. So, let's think about it from the standpoint of like, what does power look like in a salon? When you think about power, it's like setting a clear standard and standing by it, even when it's uncomfortable. It's saying like, this is how we do things around here. You're capable of that. I believe in you. Like Lindsay was mentioning earlier with the dress code, she gave the example of force would be like, why are you dressed like that? You've got to go home and change. Our stance would be like, hey, tell me what's going on today. Tell me, like, is this really going to serve you to your highest good? So it's
Mhm.
asking questions like, what would need to be true for you to feel proud of how you've handled that guest? Or like, what support would help you be more consistent? Or, like, do you feel connected to what we're building here? So using questions like what, or do you feel, like it kind of takes them from a moment of takes them from their like subconscious to their conscious part of their brain and
Mm.
helps them build a new opportunity. And so, power is when someone walks into a conversation nervous and walks out inspired.
Mhm.
Force tightens the leash. I feel like, think of it like walking a dog. You got that dog on a tight leash, and power, but power on the other hand helps raise the bar.
Mm. I love that. That is so true and such a good visual, because I really think, if your leadership feels heavy, if you're always in meetings and you're always correcting, always fixing, you're probably leading with force. So, and it doesn't mean that you're a bad leader, but it does mean that you're exhausted and you're trying to hold it together the only way that you know how. But here's the truth. Here is the truth. The most powerful leaders don't hold it all. They hold a position and let the others rise to it. They help them see that path, understand truly why this matters and help them rise to the occasion. It's like Jen mentioned with those amazing questions earlier, asking them to help them see it for themselves. Like, because when we're able to help them reveal it to themselves, then you don't have to be the one forcing them to do it. Because listen, they know why it's important to rebook guests. Maybe they just need a reminder. Ask them the questions, why do we do this? What's in it for the guest? What's in it for you? Like the power of asking those questions to help them rise into that position, that's true power.
Yeah, I think of another example. We were working with salon one time, and what they didn't recognize was that force. Like if you're giving someone feedback, forcing that person to listen to you when they're around their other teammates can be so embarrassing for them. And
Mhm.
so coming from a place of power is like, creating a connection point with that person so that it's just you and that person. And that's what's truly going to help drive them forward. Let's say it's a bad review. Instead of saying, Lindsay, did you see this bad review that, so and so left for you? Can you tell me more? What happened? What did you do? And everybody around is listening. Like that would be coming from a place of force versus a place of power. Like, hey, Lindsay, do you have time just to connect with me real quick? Let's head over here. Like, so it's
Mhm.
just like the tongue is so powerful. The words that we use are so powerful. And so, this is a beautiful opportunity for us to do some reflection. And so I want you to think about a moment, a recent moment, if that where you were forced where you forced something to happen in your business. So maybe it
Mhm.
was a conversation, maybe it was a coaching strategy that you were trying to use. Maybe you gave that harsh connection. Maybe you pushed a promo no one was excited about. Maybe you
Mhm.
stepped in and saved a situation your team could have handled. And now when you think about that, you have to ask yourself, like, what belief was behind that? Or maybe was I afraid it wouldn't happen unless I did it? That's a good one for salon owners to hear. Maybe I was afraid it wouldn't happen unless I did it. Or was I
Mm,
afraid of being misunderstood or things falling apart? See,
mm,
that's force. But if you flip it, if we led that moment from power, what would I have said differently? What questions could I have asked? And how would I
mhm.
have shown up?
Mm. So good, because truly when you are leading that place of force, it is exhausting for everyone
Mhm.
involved, not just you, but everyone, So here is your power practice for the week. So this is how you are going to step more into power this week. We want you to write down, one area in your salon where you are forcing outcomes. So write down that one area in your salon where you're forcing outcomes. And then the second step is going to be just write down one small shift you can make to lead that area from power instead of panic or force. So it could be, as simple as replacing a demand with a question. It could be holding space instead of, fixing fast. And if you need a mantra to hold on to, try this one. I don't need to force anything that's truly meant for me. And I don't need to force anyone who's truly meant to lead with me either. I think that's such a powerful mantra. And when you put, that power practice into play, you're going to notice a huge shift right away, if nothing else, and just the energy that you walk home with right away. But I guarantee people start to see the shift and see, I don't know what's going on with Lindsay over there, but something is different about her this week, and I'm into it.
I love that because if you truly think about it, like leadership doesn't mean holding all the weight. Means becoming so steady in your presence, so clear in your vision that your team naturally aligns, not out of fear, but out of inspiration. And that's the real secret. Like, you don't need to pull harder, you don't need to root deeper. And that's what power really is.
So good. You know, this was a heart centered, strategy driven episode. And if it spoke to you, share it with another salon leader that you love, because we're all on this journey of unlearning force and stepping into our power together. So until next time, keep leading with your heart and keep building something beautiful, because we truly want to bring the beauty back to the beauty industry.